The meeting room on board the Conclave station was cold, the way it always was when bad news was being shared. The walls were pale white. The long table in the center was made of a dark synthetic material that every species in the room found neutral enough not to argue about. 7 delegates sat around it, and none of them looked happy. At the head of the table stood Ambassador Rin Tessa of the Vethkai. She was tall and narrow, with feathered crests along her neck and shoulders that flattened when she was upset. Right now, they were very flat. She placed both her thin hands on the table and looked around at the faces watching her. "The planet is called Kareth Voss," she said, "and the humans want to go there." Nobody spoke for a moment. Then one of the Dorhai delegates, a wide creature with a hard brown shell and small dark eyes, made a low sound that translated roughly to the word, "No." That was my reaction as well. The Conclave of Settled Worlds had been managing the quarantine of Kareth Voss for over 200 years. In that time, 3 different species had tried to land on the planet and build something permanent. The Sorun had gone first, sending a colony ship of 4,000. They lost contact in 9 days. A rescue team went after them, and also went silent. The Dorhai had tried next, confident in their heavy armor and powerful weapons. They sent 40,000 settlers across 12 ships. The planet took 11 rotations to kill them all. The Vethkai had made the 3rd attempt, smaller and more careful, with the best scientists their people had. 60 researchers, gone in 4 days. After that, everyone agreed. The planet was a Class 9 predator world. It stayed quarantined. Nobody went back. Then humanity applied for a survey permit. Rin Tessa pulled up a display screen above the table. It showed footage from the second Dorhai expedition, grainy, shaky, shot by a helmet camera moments before the camera stopped working. On the screen, something moved through the smoke. It was enormous, 6 legs, a flat, wide head with no visible eyes. It walked through an armored wall the way a person walks through fog. The Dorhai soldier who had been filming said one word before the feed cut out. The translation matrix rendered it simply as impossible. "That is a Grakthul," Rin Tessa said. "It is the smallest specimen recorded on Kareth Voss. There are larger ones in the northern zones." The Dorhai sent battle armor, sonic repellents, and chemical deterrents. The Grakthul did not notice any of it. She switched the display. Now it showed something in the sky. Dark shapes, moving in tight formation, completely silent. "These are Velshrieks, aerial apex hunters. They do not make noise when they move. By the time any species can detect them, the attack is already over. They work in coordinated groups. The Vethkai researchers never saw them coming." She turned off the display and looked at the human delegation at the far end of the table. There were 2 of them. Dr. Mara Solis was a xenobiologist, a person who studied alien life. She was short, with dark hair pulled back from her face, and she had been writing notes the entire time Rin Tessa was speaking. She did not look frightened. She looked interested. Commander Jesper Holt sat next to her. He was older, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had spent a long time in difficult places and stopped being surprised by them. He had also been taking notes. Rin Tessa had expected fear, or at least some performance of concern. She got neither. "We have read your reports," Dr. Solis said, looking up from her notes. "All of them, including the ones the Dorhai sealed for 2 decades. We've also read the soil analysis, the atmospheric data, and the behavioral records from the Velshriek sightings." She paused. "It is a remarkable planet." One of the Soruan delegates, a creature made of many small parts that moved together as one body, shifted in place. The translation unit at its center spoke. "Remarkable. You use this word for a world that has killed everyone who has ever set foot on it." "Yes," Dr. Solis said without any argument in her voice. "That is what makes it remarkable." Commander Holt leaned forward. "We're not proposing a colony. We're proposing a survey. 12 people, full documentation, 6 months on the surface. We want to observe the fauna and study the environment. You want to observe the fauna, repeated the Dorhai delegate slowly, as if the words had come out in the wrong order. That's correct. The fauna that destroyed our fleet. Yes. There was a long silence. Rin Tessa looked at the two humans and felt something she could not name. It was not quite respect. It was not quite pity. It was somewhere in between, and it made her feathered crests rise slightly before she pressed them down again. The conclave debated for 2 hours. The vote was not close. Every non-human delegation believed the humans would die, and most of them believed that quickly. But the Accord's rules were clear. Any species with full membership status could apply for a survey permit on a quarantined world if they accepted full liability and provided their own transport and equipment. Humanity had full membership. Humanity accepted full liability. Humanity had a ship ready. The permit was granted. Before the meeting ended, Rin Tessa made one request. She asked to send an observer, a young Vethkai researcher named Aethys, to travel with the human team and document the mission. She did not tell the humans why she wanted this. The truth was that the Conclave wanted an official record of what happened, so that when the next species asked about Karath Voss, they could show them something more recent than shaky helmet footage. She expected to be presenting that record at a memorial session within the month. Aethys was 23 years old, freshly graduated, and had been chosen because he was considered talented and because none of the senior researchers wanted the assignment. He was given a good camera, a personal shield unit, and a small bag of supplies, and he was told that his job was simply to watch and report. He arrived at the human docking bay 2 days before departure. The humans were loading equipment, carefully labeled crates, medical supplies, a significant number of sensors and recording devices, and, he noticed, very few weapons. There were 6 rifles for 12 people. He introduced himself. Dr. Solis smiled at him and showed him to his berth. Commander Holt gave him a brief orientation and told him to ask questions any time. Nobody on the human team seemed nervous. They moved around the ship with calm, practiced ease, like people who had done difficult things before and were simply preparing to do another one. Aethys went to his berth that night and composed the first section of what he fully believed would be a posthumous report. He documented everything: the lack of weapons, the humans' inexplicable calm, the target planet's history. He filed it with the Conclave as a precaution. Then he lay down in the dark and listened to the sounds of the ship around him and thought about the Grak Fool walking through that armored wall. And he did not sleep at all. 3 days later, the shuttle broke through the upper atmosphere of Karath Voss, and the red planet filled the window beside his seat, vast and silent and waiting. Dr. Solis looked out the same window. She was smiling. The ground of Karath Voss was red. Not the bright red of something painted or decorated, but a deep old red, the color of dried blood and iron, the color of a world that had been doing difficult things for a very long time. The air was thick and carried a smell that Aethys could not describe, except to say that it felt like a warning. His personal air filter worked fine. His lungs were safe, but something in the smell still made his crest press flat against his neck and refuse to rise again. The 12 humans stepped out of the shuttle like they were arriving at a field station for a routine assignment. They stretched. 2 of them made a small joke about the landing. Dr. Solis crouched down, pressed 2 fingers into the red soil, and looked at the color it left on her skin with open curiosity. Commander Holt pulled out a handheld sensor, took 3 slow readings in different directions, and then turned to the team. Winds are low, no precipitation expected. Temperature is comfortable for us. He paused. 3 large heat signatures, northwest, about 400 meters out, stationary for now. Aethys checked his own scanner. The signatures were enormous. He recognized the shape of the reading. "Those are Grakthul," he said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. "Probably," Holt said. He sounded the way a person sounds when they have just confirmed something they already expected. "Let's set up camp. Standard radius, low noise protocol." Athos stood very still. "You are aware that Grakthul are 400 meters away?" "Yes. And you want to set up camp?" "That's the job," Holt said, not unkindly, and walked past him toward the supply crates. The camp went up in 2 hours. The humans worked quietly and efficiently, communicating in short sentences and hand signals when possible. They did not use any sonic deterrents. They did not spray the perimeter with chemical repellents. They moved slowly and kept their voices down. Athos had read the reports of the door-high landing. The noise, the lights, the heavy machinery unloaded all at once. He had assumed the humans would do something similar. They did not. By the time the 2 moons of Carith Voss began to show at the edge of the darkening sky, the camp was standing and the team was eating a quiet meal. The heat signatures on the scanners had moved. They were closer now. 230 meters, then 180, then 100. Dr. Solis put down her food, picked up her scanner, and stood up calmly. "One of them is separating from the group," she said. She looked at Athos. "I'm going to walk out about 50 meters and sit down. Can you document from here, please?" Athos stared at her. "You are going to walk toward it." "I'm going to walk near it. There's a difference." She paused. "I'm not going to make eye contact. I'm going to move slowly. I'm going to sit on the ground and stay there." "That is the behavior of something that is given up," Athos said. "No," she said simply, "it's the behavior of something that isn't a threat." She picked up her handheld recorder and walked out into the red dark. Athos raised his camera and watched through the lens, because it was the only way he could make himself keep his eyes open. The Grakthul came out of the tree line like a building deciding to move. It was the smallest kind, which meant it was only about the size of a large house. 6 legs, wide and low to the ground, made almost no sound on the soil. Its flat head swung from side to side in slow arcs. Its skin was dark, the color of the shadows between rocks. It had no visible eyes, but it was clearly watching. Everything about it said, "I am the most dangerous thing here, and I have always been the most dangerous thing here." Dr. Solis sat down on the ground 40 meters in front of it. She did not look at it directly. She set her recorder on her knee and became very still. The Grakthul stopped. It stood there for a long time. Its head moved. It seemed to be reading the air, processing something it had not encountered before. Its standard targets, the prey species it had evolved to hunt across millions of years, all did the same things when they encountered it. They ran, or they froze in obvious terror, or they made noise and tried to look large. Every behavior was predictable. Every behavior told the creature the same simple story. This thing is afraid of me, and afraid things can be caught. Dr. Solis did none of those things. She sat. She breathed slowly. She looked at the ground to her left. From the camp, Athos watched one of the human engineers, a young man named Tobias Wren, sidle up next to Commander Holt, and whisper, "She doing okay?" Holt checked his scanner. "Heart rate is elevated, but steady. She's fine." "Cool," Tobias said, and went back to eating. Athos filed a note in his report. "The humans appear to have found a way to be calm in the presence of something that should make calm impossible. I do not yet understand how." 40 minutes passed. The Grakthul did not charge. It did not retreat. It circled, slowly, at a wide radius, moving around Dr. Solis the way something moves around an unfamiliar object it cannot yet classify. It came as close as 20 meters at one point. She did not flinch. She turned her head slightly away and made herself smaller in posture. The creature paused. Its breathing, deep, subsonic, felt more than heard, slowed. Then it stopped circling, and simply stood, 30 meters away, watching the camp. Dr. Solis stood up slowly, turned around, and walked back to the camp, at the same steady pace. She sat down, picked up her food, and continued eating. Tobias held out a chunk of pressed ration bar in her direction. "Want the rest of this? I'm full." "Sure," she said, and took it. He pulled out another piece and looked out toward the Grakthul. "You think it'd eat one of these?" "Tobias," Commander Holt said, "I'm just asking. Don't throw food at the apex predator on day 1. What about day 2? Holt sighed. Athos wrote in his report, "I believe the humans find this funny. I do not find this funny." But Tobias, being Tobias, tossed the ration bar in a gentle arc when Holt looked away. It landed 10 meters from the Grakthul. The creature looked down at it. It sniffed. It ate it. Then it took 3 slow steps closer to the camp's edge and lowered itself to the ground, settling its enormous body into the red soil. It stayed there. Above them, the Vel shrieks, the silent aerial hunters, circled in patterns that Athos tracked with growing anxiety. But they did not dive. Perhaps it was the Grakthul's presence. Perhaps it was something else. Either way, the camp remained untouched. Athos sat at the edge of his sleeping area, his camera in his hands, watching the Grakthul's breathing shift into the slow rhythm of something that had decided, at least for tonight, to rest. The humans slept. He did not. He sent his second report to the conclave just before dawn. It was 3 sentences long. The Grakthul did not attack. It is currently sleeping near the camp perimeter. I do not have an explanation for this, and I am beginning to think I will need a better framework entirely before I can provide one. In the gray light just before the Kareth Voss sun came up, Athos looked at the sleeping creature, and then at the sleeping humans, and then at the red ancient ground beneath all of them. He had come here to document a tragedy. He was no longer sure what he was documenting. 3 weeks after landing, nobody was dead. This fact alone was enough to cause 3 separate emergency sessions at the conclave station. The first session lasted 6 hours. The second lasted 9. The third one ended early because the Soran delegate had to be helped out of the room after their probability unit began producing numbers that the delegate described as cosmically offensive. Athos sent reports every 2 days. They were read aloud in full. Other species researchers gathered around terminals to listen. Junior diplomats forwarded them to senior diplomats. Senior diplomats forwarded them to their governments. Everyone read them. Nobody knew what to do with what they were reading. The reports described things like this. The Grakthul that Tobias had named Bricks, because it had roughly the same personality as a large, quiet brick, which Tobias seemed to mean as a compliment, now walked the team's survey routes with them. It did not follow closely. It stayed about 80 meters back, moving when they moved, stopping when they stopped. Dr. Solis had begun acknowledging it each morning, with a slow nod and a low, soft sound. And Bricks had begun, in its own way, acknowledging her back. A brief settling of weight, a slight turn of the flat head, a change in its breathing. 2 other Grakthul had joined in the past week. They were larger than Bricks. They kept more distance, but they stayed in the same general pattern, loosely around the camp and the survey routes, present and watchful. The Vel shrieks had not attacked a single member of the team. On day 19, one had landed near Dr. Solis on a high ridge where she had been spending 2 hours each day, sitting still and mimicking their sonar click patterns back into the open air. The sound was difficult. The Vel shrieks communicated in ranges that required unusual breath control. The creature that landed was mature and large, with a wingspan that cast a shadow the size of a small room. It studied her for 11 minutes, then stepped forward and allowed her to raise her arm. It perched there. She sat very still and let it stay until it chose to leave. She named it Needle. Athos had filmed the entire thing with shaking hands and steady breath control. Because his Vethkai biology made emotional regulation easier than fear management. And he had accepted some time ago that fear was going to be the background condition of this entire mission. He had simply decided to film through it. His reports had begun including a new section he labeled Observed Human Behavioral Notes, because he had come to believe that the humans themselves were as scientifically significant as anything else on Karath Vos. He wrote things like, "The humans do not appear to register the Grakthul as threats after initial contact. They speak near them at normal volume. They move around them without excessive caution. This does not appear to be recklessness. It appears to be a form of social recognition. They treat the creatures as present rather than dangerous." He wrote, "I observed Tobias Wren sitting with his back against a rock, while Brix rested nearby. Tobias was eating and reading a text document, and did not look up for approximately 40 minutes. Brix did not move during this period. There was something in this scene that I found difficult to describe in scientific language. The closest I can get is, it looked like two creatures that had decided, without making a formal agreement, that they were comfortable in each other's presence." He wrote, "I am starting to think the humans have done this before. Not on Karath Vos specifically, but something like it. I am starting to think this is not unusual behavior for them." That last note prompted the conclave to request more information, and Dr. Solis agreed to record a formal explanation for the record. She sat in front of Aethys's camera and spoke plainly, in the way she always spoke, without performance or pride. She told him about Earth. She described a planet that had produced predators of its own, large, fast, patient hunters, with teeth and claws, and instincts refined over millions of years. She described how the species that would become humanity had evolved not in a safe environment, but in direct competition with these animals. They were not the fastest thing on their planet. They were not the strongest. They did not have natural armor, or venom, or flight. What they had was endurance, pattern recognition, and this was the part Aethys found hardest to process, an unusual relationship with fear itself. On Earth, the prey animals had fear responses that flooded their bodies with chemicals, made them bolt, or freeze, or make noise. Humanity had fear responses too, but they were shaped differently. Humans had learned, over a very long time, to use fear as information rather than a command. The chemical signature their bodies produced under threat was not identical to the panic scent of prey animals. It was something else, something older, something that had, in different circumstances, once allowed them to follow a predator for 3 days across open ground until the predator exhausted itself. Something that had made them, in the terms of their own evolutionary history, a different kind of hunter. "The Grakthul didn't attack us," Dr. Solis said, "because we don't smell like prey. We don't move like prey. We don't make the sounds prey makes. Their instincts are built around a very specific trigger system, and we don't hit any of those triggers." She paused, looking at the camera. "Earth wasn't kind to us. It wasn't safe. It made us into something that could survive being afraid, without letting fear make our decisions. Karath Vos can read that. The animals here are old and smart in their own way, and what they read when they look at us is, I think, something like recognition." Commander Holt had his own version of the same explanation, shorter and less scientific. He said it in his log one evening when he thought no one was recording, but Aethys's ambient sensors were always on. "Earth didn't make us survivors by making us fragile. Karath Vos knows its own." Aethys said both recordings to the conclave without comment. The recordings did what they needed to do, on their own. On day 22, something happened that Aethys would spend the rest of his career trying to properly describe. The team was moving through a narrow canyon in the eastern survey zone when the sensors picked up a new signal. A large pack of mid-tier predators called Scrath, fast and social hunters that had killed the Sorun team's outer scouts in the first failed expedition. There were 14 of them, moving from the north, and they were converging on the canyon at speed. The human team stopped. Holt called a quiet halt, and everyone went still. What happened next took about 4 minutes. Bricks came around the southern wall of the canyon at a pace Athos had never seen from the creature, purposeful and fast for something its size. The two larger Grakthul came from the east. All three animals placed themselves at the northern mouth of the canyon, between the humans and the approaching Scrath pack. The Scrath arrived. They saw the Grakthul. They stopped. The two sides regarded each other for a long, silent moment. The Scrath turned around and left. Bricks stood at the canyon mouth for another 2 minutes before slowly turning and walking back to its place 80 meters behind the survey team. The other two Grakthul drifted back to their positions. Nobody gave an order. Nobody asked for anything. Nobody made a sound. Dr. Solis looked at Athos. He looked back at her. His camera was still running. His hands had finally, after 3 weeks on this planet, stopped shaking. He wasn't sure what to call it. But later that night, alone in his monitoring station, he called his superior at the conclave and said the thing he had been working up to for days. "I don't think we understand humans," he said. "I've been watching them for 3 weeks on the most dangerous world in the known galaxy, and I don't think anyone in the Accord has ever properly understood what they are." His superior was quiet for a moment. Then she said the conclave was considering a recall order. Athos looked out the small window of the monitoring station. Bricks was outside in the dark, breathing slow, settled into the red soil, like something that had found a place it was comfortable. "I know," Athos said. "I think that's a mistake." The conclave vessel CSW Measured Mercy arrived in orbit above Kareth Voss on the 41st day of the human survey mission. It was a large ship, gray and official-looking, with the Accord's emblem pressed into the hull plating, and enough diplomatic staff on board to end a small war through paperwork. It also carried 6 door-high security enforcers, which was the conclave's polite way of making sure that what they called a voluntary extraction did not become a debate. Ambassador Rin Tisea was on board. She had insisted on coming personally. The conclave had not argued. She was the one who had granted the permit in the first place, and she was the one who had been reading Athos's reports in her quarters, at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, trying to understand what was happening on the surface of a planet that was supposed to be a simple tragedy. The orbital scan confirmed what Athos had been reporting. What started as a temporary 12-person survey base now had 2 additional modules, a proper communications tower, and a perimeter that was clearly designed for longer-term use. The scan also confirmed the biological signatures outside the camp perimeter: large, multiple, stationary. The Grakthul were still there. Rin Tessa stood at the scanning window for a long time. Then she went to her cabin and spent an hour preparing what she was going to say. The shuttle from the Measured Mercy touched down 200 meters from the human camp. The ramp lowered. Rin Tessa walked out first, flanked by 2 diplomatic staff and 2 of the door-high enforcers. The other 4 enforcers stayed near the shuttle. They had been briefed on the fauna. They wanted to stay near the shuttle. What Rin Tessa saw when she looked at the camp did not match the image in her head. She had been imagining something embattled. A team of lucky survivors clinging to a small circle of safety in a hostile world. What she found instead looked like a working research station. Equipment was organized outside the modules. A data antenna rotated steadily on its mount. Someone had planted a small marker flag in the red soil with a hand-drawn symbol on it that Athos had told her, in a report, was a human sign meaning home base. Athos was standing outside the camp entrance waiting for her. He looked different than she remembered. He was calmer. His crest was neutral, not pressed flat in stress. He had lost the look of someone waiting for something terrible to happen. "Ambassador," he said. He sounded genuinely glad to see her, but not in the way of someone who has been rescued. In the way of someone who has been waiting to show you something. "Athos," she said, "are you well?" I want you to walk into the camp slowly and not make any sudden movements near the north wall. She looked at the north wall. A Grakthul was lying against it. Its 6 legs were folded under its body. Its flat head rested on the ground. It was either asleep or doing something that looked exactly like sleeping. Rin Tessa's diplomatic training was very good. She did not make a sound. She walked through the camp entrance slowly and did not look at the creature directly. Dr. Solis met them inside. She shook Rin Tessa's hand, a human greeting gesture that Rin Tessa had always found oddly direct, and offered her a seat and something warm to drink. Commander Holt stood nearby, arms loose at his sides, watching the door-high enforcers with the calm, steady attention of someone who had assessed a room and found it manageable. I imagine the Conclave is concerned, Dr. Solis said. The Conclave is recalling your mission. She kept her voice level. The permit was for 6 months of survey work, but given the developments, the Council believes it is appropriate to extract the team, compile the data, and evaluate next steps from a safer location. Dr. Solis nodded slowly. She looked at the warm drink in her hands. Can I ask what specifically triggered the recall? Rin Tessa looked at her steadily. You are living on a Class 9 predator world, with apex fauna sleeping against your outer walls. The Conclave finds this alarming. The Grakthul haven't hurt anyone. They haven't hurt you. They destroyed 3 colonial expeditions. I know. Dr. Solis looked up. Can I ask you something? Rin Tessa folded her hands. Go ahead. The 3 expeditions that failed, what did they have in common, in terms of how they arrived? The question sat in the air. Rin Tessa answered it carefully. They came with large numbers, heavy equipment, chemical deterrents, and sonic repellents. They came loud, Dr. Solis said. They came prepared. They came in a way that every predator on this planet was evolved to interpret as aggression from a prey species that knew it was in danger. Dr. Solis set down her cup. Rin Tessa, the Grakthul don't respond to force, because force is the language of prey trying to survive. Every deterrent your people used, every weapon the Dorhai deployed, it spoke directly to the part of these animals that is wired to hunt frightened things. You told the planet you were afraid. The planet responded accordingly. Rin Tessa was quiet. Commander Holt stepped forward. We didn't conquer this world. We introduced ourselves to it. Slowly, quietly, as something that was not afraid and was not a threat. The fauna here are intelligent enough, in their own way, to tell the difference. You got lucky, Rin Tessa said. She did not say it dismissively. She said it like someone trying to hold onto a position they could feel slipping. You could have landed and been killed before you had time to demonstrate any of that. The Velshrieks alone. The Velshrieks hunt in the early morning, between the first and second sunrise, Dr. Solis said. We landed at midday. I checked the behavioral data from the Vethkai expedition before we came. Your researchers were attacked at dawn on day 2. We made sure to be calm, stationary, and non-threatening during that window on days 1 and 3. By day 4, Needle had already landed near me. The room was silent for a moment. You planned for that, Rin Tessa said. We planned for everything we could plan for, Holt said. The rest we handled when it came. Rin Tessa looked at the table. Then she looked at Athos, who had been standing to the side saying nothing, his recorder running as always. You asked not to be recalled. I asked for the recall order to be reconsidered, he said. There is a difference. Is there? There is a Velshriek nest on the communications tower, Athos said calmly. They built it 11 days ago. The team works around it. Needle brought 2 others. They haven't hunted within 300 meters of the camp since day 20. That is not luck, Ambassador. That is a relationship. I don't think we should leave before we understand it. Rin Tessa stood up and walked to the module's small window. Outside, the red ground stretched to the tree line. The big Grakthul that was sleeping against the wall shifted, resettled, and was still again. In the far distance, dark shapes turned slow circles in the sky. She stood there for a long time. Then she turned around and said, "I'm going to suspend the recall pending a full conclave review. That will take 30 days minimum. During that time, your team stays. Aethys stays. My diplomatic staff stays." She paused. "I stay." Dr. Solis looked at her quietly. "You didn't come here just to recall us." Rintessa said nothing for a moment. Then, with the particular honesty of someone who had stopped pretending, she said, "I came here because I needed to see it for myself." That evening, as the Kareth sun went down in layers of deep orange and red, Rintessa stood at the camp perimeter. She stood still. She kept her crest flat by instinct, though she was beginning to understand that fear scent was the thing to manage, not posture. She breathed slowly. The large Grakthul, Bricks, the humans called it, came around the wall and walked past her at a distance of maybe 15 meters. It was the closest she had ever been to one. It was the first time she had been this close to one and was still alive. It turned its wide, flat head and looked at her for a long moment. Then it kept walking. She did not move until it was gone. Then she let out a slow breath and looked up at the sky, where the first stars were appearing, over a world that had terrified her species for 2 centuries. And she thought about what Dr. Solis had asked her. Has it ever occurred to you that the problem was never the planet? It had not. 1 year after the human survey team first touched down on the red soil of Kareth, the Conclave of Settled Worlds held the loudest session in its 400-year history. The chamber was full, not just the standard 7 delegations, but observers from 14 other member species, research representatives from 6 academic institutions, and 3 independent journalists who had somehow gotten press passes and sat in the back row, looking slightly overwhelmed. The session had been scheduled for 2 hours. It ran for 11. The matter before the conclave was this. Humanity had submitted a formal proposal called the Kareth Cohabitation Framework. In plain language, it asked the conclave to change Kareth from a Class 9 quarantine world, a place officially classified as unsurvivable and off-limits to all settled species, to something the humans were calling an open sanctuary. Under the framework, a permanent human-led team would live on the surface, continue their research, and serve as what the proposal called a contact and integration presence. They were not asking to own the planet. They were not asking to change it. They were asking, in careful and specific language, to be allowed to continue living with it. The Sorun Probability Unit had run the framework through their models 17 times before the session. 13 of the 17 runs showed the same result. Under the human approach, the biodiversity of Kareth, the very thing that had made it lethal to every prior expedition, stabilized. Without the chemical deterrents and sonic weapons and panicked behavior that had provoked the planet's fauna in the past, the cascade of violence that had killed every prior expedition never started. The planet was not inherently hostile to settled presence. It was hostile to a particular kind of settled presence, the kind that arrived afraid and armed and loud. The Sorowin delegate presented these findings. It took 40 minutes. The chamber was quiet throughout. Then the arguments began. Several delegates argued that the framework set a dangerous precedent, that other species might attempt the same approach without the particular biological and behavioral qualities that made humans capable of it, and get killed in the attempt. This was a fair point. The human delegation acknowledged it and proposed a certification requirement. Any species wishing to attempt a similar contact mission on any predator world would need to complete a training program developed in partnership with the Kareth team. The conclave noted the proposal and moved on. Several delegates argued that the planet's fauna might still pose an unpredictable danger, that the apparent relationships the humans had formed with the Grakthul and the Velshrieks could break down without warning. This was also a fair point. The human delegation submitted 1 year of continuous behavioral data, showing no significant aggression events after the initial contact period. They also submitted Aethys's full observation logs, which at this point ran to over 400 pages, and were, as one senior Vethkai researcher put it privately, the most remarkable document she had ever read. The Vethkai delegation was the most conflicted. Rintessa led their side of the debate herself. She acknowledged the data. She acknowledged what she had seen during her own 30-day stay on the surface. She acknowledged that she had stood 15 meters from a Grakthul and survived, and that this was not something any member of her species had done before. She still voted for a restricted approval, rather than a full open sanctuary classification. She said, honestly and without apology, that her species needed more time to accept something this large. 9 votes in favor, 3 for restricted approval, 2 abstentions. Kareth Voss was reclassified. The news traveled fast. In research institutions across the known galaxy, scientists who had spent careers studying predator worlds and behavioral ecology read the session transcript with the focused intensity of people who know a paradigm has just changed. Younger researchers, who had grown up reading old quarantine reports and accepting Class 9 worlds as simply impossible, sat with the news for a long time and then started writing questions they had never thought to ask before. On the surface of Kareth Voss, the permanent outpost team received the vote result via the communications tower. The Velshriek nest on top of the tower had grown. 4 nesting pairs now. Needle was still there, recognizable by a slight irregularity in its left wing that Dr. Solis had documented on the day it first landed on her arm. When the vote result came through, Tobias Wren climbed to the roof of the comms module and sat up there for a while, looking out at the red land and the big sky. Brix was visible from up there, moving slowly through the eastern field. 2 juveniles, young Grakthul, significantly smaller, which in this case meant about the size of a standard transport vehicle, had begun following Brix around 3 weeks ago. The team believed they were offspring, though Dr. Solis was careful to note that the Grakthul social structure was still not fully understood. The juveniles had begun treating the camp the way Brix did, as a known feature of their territory, present and familiar and unthreatening. Commander Holt was reviewing equipment logs when the result came through. He read it twice. Then he set down his tablet and went outside and stood in the morning air for a while. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Dr. Mara Solis was already out. She had been out since before the second sun rose, which was when she liked to walk. She did this most mornings now, alone, without equipment, just her and the planet. She had a route she followed along the edge of the Ashfin Basin, where the red soil gave way to a low ridge, and you could see the tree line in one direction, and the open plateau in the other. She walked it slowly. The air was cool, and carried its particular smell, that strange warning smell she had noticed on the very first day, which she had long since come to think of as simply the smell of the place, no more alarming than the smell of any other home. Around her, things moved. She heard them in the way she had learned to hear them, not as threats, but as company. The low rustle in the long grass to her left, the shift of weight somewhere in the trees ahead, the distant, subsonic breathing that she felt in her chest before she heard it properly. She crouched down and pressed her hand flat against the red soil. It was cool in the early morning, and it held the faint vibration of the plateau's bedrock, something geological and old and indifferent to everything above it. She had pressed her hand to this ground on the very first day, when Aethys was watching from the shuttle and writing what he expected to be a posthumous report. She had done it because she wanted to know what the place felt like. It felt like it had always felt. Old, real, present. Behind her, she heard the familiar sound of bricks settling into the ground, that deep, slow exhale of a creature that had found its morning spot. Close today. maybe 30 meters. She did not turn around. She did not need to. They knew she was there. On Karath Vos, that was enough. She stood up after a while and kept walking. Back at the conclave station, Aethys was finishing his final formal report, the one that would accompany the reclassification documents and sit in the Accord's permanent record as the official scientific account of the Karath Vos mission. He had been writing it for 3 days. It was long, detailed, and careful, in the way that all his reports had been. But the closing section had taken him the longest, because he had written it and deleted it 4 times before he found the words that were actually true. He sat at his desk in the small office the conclave had given him. Temporary, he kept saying, though the box of his personal items still sat unpacked in the corner, and he read the closing paragraph 1 more time. Then he sent the report. Then he filed a separate, shorter document, a formal request for permanent posting to the Karath Vos surface station. Attached to the request was a single note, addressed to the Conclave's assignment board. It said, "In my 14 months observing the Karath Vos mission, I have revised my understanding of predators, of prey, of courage, and of humanity, in that order. The surface team has agreed to have me. The Grakthul have not objected. I recommend all member species read the full mission logs before drawing conclusions about what is and is not possible. Do not reassign me." The assignment board approved the request 6 days later. It was, the reviewing officer noted in her own file memo, the first time in the Accord's history that a non-human researcher had requested a permanent posting on a Class 9 world. She added one more line to the memo before closing it. Effective immediately, Karath Vos is no longer Class 9.